Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what is honestly a breathtaking story. We are tracing the historical accounts of a kingdom's rise to unparalleled glory, and then its sudden, tragic collapse. It's a look at King Solomon and his successor, and it serves as a literal masterclass in leadership, human nature, and that really delicate balance between power and humility. Let's get right into it. So, here is one of history's most profound questions. How does a golden age collapse in a single day? I mean, think about it. You have this kingdom that has reached its absolute zenith. We're talking international respect, staggering wealth, and profound wisdom. And yet, just one generation later, it completely shatters. To wrap our heads around that collapse, we first have to understand the peak. We're going to contrast the breathtaking height of Solomon's reign with the absolute catastrophic failure of his son. And the story of that peak, it doesn't actually start with a military victory or some big trade deal. It starts with a really remarkable moment of spiritual dedication. All right, Section 1, the direction of prayer. To figure out this peak, we have to look at Solomon's famous dedication prayer and really how humanity was meant to respond to the divine presence. Notice this huge theological shift he makes right out of the gate. He says, "The heavens cannot contain you." Solomon completely understood that this spectacular, massive temple he just spent years building wasn't meant to trap, limit, or somehow cage God. He knew the creator of the universe couldn't be boxed in by human architecture. Instead, the temple was designed to be like a directional compass. It wasn't a container. It was a focal point for the people to orient their hearts and direct their prayers toward God. And his prayer here is brilliantly structured. He kicks off by praising a God who keeps promises. But, he doesn't pray for some unrealistic utopia. He actually anticipates real crises like war, famine, drought, and he establishes a protocol for when they inevitably hit. Also, wildly progressive for the ancient world, he explicitly welcomes the prayers of foreigners. This wasn't some exclusive VIP club. It was an open door for literally all nations to seek salvation. And ultimately, the focus is on the people's joy. The goal wasn't just to have a fancy building, but for a humble, joyful people to find their anchor in God. Moving right along to Section 2, Fire and Divine Response. Well, a prayer of that magnitude, it demands an answer. And the historical texts describe a moment of just absolute awe. God's response to Solomon's humble, well-directed prayer was immediate and overwhelming. Fire literally descends from heaven, visibly consuming the sacrifices. But it doesn't stop there. The temple is then filled with a divine glory so dense, so physically overwhelming, that even the trained priests cannot enter the building. And what is the natural human reaction to all this? The people just naturally bowed down in total awe. There was no casualness here. This was an encounter that demanded complete reverence. Out of this profound encounter, we get one of the most famous formulas for restoration in historical texts, found in 2 Chronicles 7:14. Look at the strict sequence of this pathway. Step 1, humble yourself. Step 2, pray. Step 3, seek God. And Step 4, turn from wicked ways. Actually, notice how true recovery always starts with human humility. You have to recognize you need help first. Only after these sequential human actions does the divine response activate, ending with healing and forgiveness. It's a highly structured pathway from brokenness back to wholeness. Which brings us to Section 3, Order in Daily Life. Because, let's face it, spiritual highs and these grand moments, they don't last forever. Eventually, you gotta come down from the mountain. For a kingdom to actually thrive, those moments have to translate into structured, everyday governance. So, after finishing a massive 20-year construction phase, Solomon makes this really fascinating administrative decision. He relocates his wife, Pharaoh's daughter, out of the city of David. Why? Because he prioritized the holiness of the area where the Ark of the Covenant had been, basically putting spiritual integrity right above political convenience. On top of that, he establishes regular, continuous, rhythmic worship. He doesn't just rely on the memory of fire falling from heaven. He builds a daily, orderly system and strategically places officials based on divine order, not just raw ambition. Now for Section 4, the peak of glory. This combo of divine blessing and meticulous leadership, it skyrockets the kingdom into an unprecedented golden age. Rumors of Solomon's wealth and fame spread so far that foreign dignitaries come just to see if it's actually real. The most famous, of course, is the Queen of Sheba. She shows up not for a casual visit, but to test him with incredibly difficult questions. She wants to know, is the hype about his intellect and wealth accurate? And what she discovers absolutely blows her away. But crucially, she doesn't just praise Solomon the man. She ultimately praises God as the true source of his wisdom. The success of the kingdom was operating exactly as it should, pointing the nations toward the divine. Just to put this peek into perspective for a second, the historical text records Solomon's annual income at an astonishing 666 talents of gold. That is an absolutely unimaginable scale of wealth in the ancient world. To give you an idea, silver was considered as common as stones. This represents the literal historical fulfillment of the promises made to him. He had asked for wisdom, and he was granted not only wisdom, but unparalleled riches and peace. But then, the narrative does something super unexpected. After detailing all this dazzling gold, the ivory thrones, the global fame, there is a sudden, almost eerie textual silence. Solomon dies after a 40-year reign, and the text concludes his life very quietly. It's kind of this subtle, ominous warning. It quietly reminds us that worldly glory, no matter how vast, eventually fades. When success stops pointing to its divine source and just becomes an end unto itself, well, the descent has already begun. And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, A Kingdom Divided. Man, that descent happens terrifyingly fast. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, inherits the throne and immediately faces the ultimate test of leadership. He goes to Shechem to be made king, and the people approach him with a petition. They say, "Lighten our heavy yoke." Now, we need to clarify something very important here. This was not a rebellion. They weren't trying to overthrow him or anything. It was simply a desperate, practical plea for survival. Solomon's massive building projects and that accumulated wealth we just talked about, it came at a heavy cost to the working class. The people were just asking for a little breathing room, promising to serve him faithfully if he just showed a tiny bit of compassion. So Rehoboam asks for 3 days to think about it, placing himself at the absolute crossroads of leadership. Look at the two paths in front of him here. On one side, the elders, the men who had actually served his father, Solomon. Their advice? Servant leadership. They tell him, if you serve these people today, they will serve you forever. On the other side, you have the young men, Rehoboam's peers. Their advice? Dominate the people. Show them who's boss. They tell him to double down on the oppression just to prove his strength. Tragically, Rehoboam completely lacks the wisdom of his father. He rejects the elders' counsel entirely and chooses the path of arrogance. He returns to the people and delivers this completely devastating quote. "My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." I mean, wow. It is a stunning display of a total lack of empathy. In a singular, disastrous choice, he chooses intimidation over service. He genuinely thinks raw power equals strong leadership. The fallout is instantaneous. A completely unified, glorious kingdom is broken by a single sentence. The people realize they have absolutely no part in this oppressive regime, and the nation permanently divides into the north, which becomes Israel, and the south, Judah. It's such a profound historical lesson. A community, a company, or a country isn't usually destroyed by a lack of military strength or external enemies. It is destroyed from within, by a leader's arrogant attitude and a failure to listen. Which leaves us with a pretty powerful reflection based on this historical cautionary tale. Whether you manage a team, lead a family, or run a massive organization, the ultimate question remains, do you lead with power, relying on dominance and force? Or do you serve with heart, understanding that true loyalty is earned through empathy and humility? Solomon's legacy shows us the breathtaking heights of what happens when wisdom points to a higher purpose, but Rehoboam's folly warns us of how quickly it all shatters when empathy disappears. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.